Hello. Some of you know me. For those that don't, I'm Derek Reese. I work at Red Hat. I'm a programmer, mostly on website stuff, but occasionally other projects. This is the Patternkit project. It's a drag and drop mix and match interface for Drupal. It is what we're calling the next generation of page building. So we at Red Hat have a whole ton of website infrastructure. We have all sorts of different ways that we build up all of our sites. And when we were putting all these things together, we kind of stumbled onto design systems and building independent patterns and components. You know, things like using Google's material design, or in our case, we have something we open source called Patternfly. And these design systems have all these components, whether it be React or Twig or handlebars or something like that. And our thing was like, okay, we're building these amazing design systems. We have all these like tokens that are building them up. We have all these different like atoms and molecules and organisms. How do we get all that into a Drupal site? And so that's where we ended up where we are today with what's a better answer to that question. So I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions to figure out kind of where we stand and where we want to go with this. So if everybody could raise your hand, everybody, I know it's after lunch, so everyone's a little tired, right? Put your hands up. If you have never used a design system like Google Material Design, or even like an implementation like Bootstrap or Patternfly or anything like that, go ahead and put your hand down. Okay. If you have never built a site with an implementation of a design system, like using Pattern Lab or Storybook and actually taking those direct patterns and putting them into Drupal, go ahead and put your hand down. Okay, interesting. If you have not personally written code to connect these patterns to the front end, go ahead and put your hand down. Cool, all right. So that really helps me a lot. Thank you guys so much for participating in that exercise. Helps me kind of know what we need to focus on for this presentation. So there's a couple of things that we need to talk about then. The first is I saw a couple of people put their hands down with design systems. So really quick, design system, as I said, like material design or the implementation like Bootstrap, essentially is a series of guidelines and rules for creating a implementation like a website. So these are things like branding guidelines, like here's our colors, here's the typography we're going to use. And it also includes things such as the individual patterns that are going to be making up that design system. So those are things like a button all the way up to an entire card that maybe has like an image and some text and like a call to action link at the bottom. Then we have pattern libraries. So pattern libraries are an implementation of a design system. They're basically taking those buttons and those cards, those headers, little links, image implementations, and putting those into code. So pattern library itself is code. And most of the time those are going to take the form of JavaScript files like React or Twig files for most of Drupal sites. And in fact, if you've built a theme for Drupal, you probably already have a pattern library and may have implemented a bit of design system without even thinking about it. Because you've had to go into all of those templates and build out your buttons and your links and all that other stuff and customize it and put some CSS and theming and styling on it. Then we come to the portion where you want to get it into Drupal. And cool, you can read that on here. Basically, these are our consumers. So all these patterns have to get into Drupal somehow. And from there, there's different ways of doing it, but the best way, obviously, I think for most people, especially if you have content authors on your teams, is what you see is what you get interface, right? You don't want to really have to write code for this. You don't want to have to go through a whole bunch of configuration. You want to go through your library of patterns and be like, hey, I want this button, and I want this card, and I want this header with the beautiful animated background. And that's unfortunately not quite where we're at today. So let's talk about what we're doing right. And this applies not just to Red Hat, but I think to the open source and Drupal community overall. First thing is, we're talking about this. We're being collaborative. All of us are having this ongoing discussion about what are our design systems, what are our best practices for it. This whole concept of pattern tokens, this is a brand new thing. Just for reference those that don't know what that is, that's the idea that you can take things like your colors and your typography, just like the very basic components that it's like, what's my company, what's my brand? And you can put those in places that are accessible by all of your tools. So Sketch, Photoshop, Illustrator, Drupal, whatever. the idea is that you should be able to store those. Right? And this is a brand new conversation that's only come up over the past couple of years. So we're continually talking about this. We're continually evolving where we're going with everything. We're also sharing pattern libraries. So most famous example, of course, I mentioned this a couple times, is Google's material design. But they actually have implementations. You can go onto GitHub and download them. Red Hat has Patternfly. You can go to patternfly.org and download these implementations. You can go to the Patternfly GitHub repo and clone that repo. You can edit it, you can modify it, you can contribute it, and bring it back to the community. So we're all talking about this and we're all sharing these things together, which is great. That's the perfect first step. Something else we're doing is Red Hat, we're very much all in on web components. This is great, and that's kind of like a future thing, but the idea is we know where we're headed. We have a very clear direction for all this technology that we're building and all these tools that we're creating. And so that helps everything kind of converge in a very single mainline direction, which means these conversations have shared commonality. And finally, of course, why we're all here, we use a consistent and well-maintained open source CMS, which means that the way that we're building our website backends is all the same. Everyone in here is either Drupal adjacent, meaning you've worked with someone who actually builds sites or are interested in Drupal, right? Or you work on Drupal itself and build sites with it or contribute to core modules and contrib. So all these are like really great things that we're doing and what we have going for us. But the reason you guys are here and the reason I'm here is there's some stuff that maybe we're not quite doing right. So one of those is bench strength. When I talk to people about pattern libraries and implementing design systems, I have not really met too many people that do things the same way we do at Red Hat, which means that if people are going to move jobs, or we're going to bring on contractors to help us out with our sites, or we're going to try to hire new people, every single time we do that, we have to train someone on how our system's built up. And that's expensive. That costs a lot of time. It costs a lot of money. And especially for smaller agencies, you don't really have a lot of time to do that sort of stuff. If you're building a new site and your client's like, oh man, I want to use material design, and you don't already know how to implement it, you got to take the time to do that research. And that means that your offer, your RFP to that client is going to be way more expensive than a competitor who already knows how to use that system. So that's not exactly a strength, especially in the open source community where we can talk and share about all this stuff. There's also a ton of duplication of effort. There's multiple modules that all kind of do the same thing. There's multiple approaches to implementing these patterns. I mean, how many people here, like show of hands, have had to use a site with like paragraphs and it's like a nightmare to maintain, right? Yeah, we've all experienced that, right? Or you have a Drupal 7 site, it's built entirely on like panels, and then they want to go to Drupal 8, you're like, dear God, how am I going to do this, right? So you start playing around with blocks or UI patterns or something like that. There's a million different ways to do these things, and that's not very consistent with good software development. We're wasting a lot of effort in a lot of different places. And then finally, and that one kind of goes off the slide there a little bit, but there's a lot of issues with this infrastructure and the way that we're building sites where we end up with a single point of failure, which means if something goes down in this process of taking a pattern library and bringing it into a site, it screws up everything. And a good example of that is if you have React patterns right now, and one of those React patterns breaks, the JavaScript on the page breaks, right? And that's just a pain in the butt. Now, of course, there's, your development methodology will help you get around that, right? And there's processes, there's linters that help with those sorts of things. But most of the ways that we build sites today, at some point, there's a single point of failure, and that's not fantastic. So this is where Patternkit comes in. And Patternkit essentially is, at surface level, just a Drupal module. But also, it's a methodology, and it's an idea that we can take all of these different tools that we're using, all these different implementations, and bring them in the same manner. So it's reproducible, it's consistent, and all of us can talk about it using the same language. So there's some gains here, minus the CSS that's rendering. Let me see if I can make that a little bit easier to read.
You should have let me help you.
All right. I've done Fedora. I work at Red Hat. I can do that. So our first gain is pattern mapping. So what this allows is our patterns to be used in Drupal, independent of schema and without code. So what that means right now is if you guys have a whole bunch of React patterns, right, and React code that you've written, or you have Angular code or web components or something like that, and you want to get that into Drupal, there's not an easy single way to do that, right? There's not really a best practices way to get all that stuff to show up in a Drupal. So if you're a content author and you're like, man, I really love this like React component I have that has the interactive map on it, and I can go and like click the different locations and it shows up on my cool article, you have to wait for a developer to take that little application they built, that little React component, and put that into the site for you. You can't just say, oh, I want to grab that and bring it into Drupal. So pattern mapping is something that Patternkit does, and it lets you actually bring in these individual components to Drupal. Now, sure, we don't cover every type of pattern, forever. That'd be crazy if I'm like sitting here and writing like 60 different libraries. But we give you guys the freedom to do that. There's a plugin system. Secondly, drag and drop, as I mentioned earlier, right? That's kind of an ideal way to build things. Has anyone, can I see a show of hands, has anyone used like MailChimp's editor? Right? Okay, so we got a decent amount of people. Wix or Weebly, any of those drag and drops, right? It's fun, it's quick, right? It just works. Now, granted, you can't do every single thing you want, but you can get most of the stuff you need, right? And that's the important thing, especially for our content authors. If they're coming in and they're like, oh man, I gotta sweep this deadline and it's just absolutely nuts, it's 24 hours or something, I can just prototype out a page and get it up there because we have to do this product launch or something, right? That's not a fun time for you as a developer to get a call and have them go, hey, I know you're busy on another project right now, but you gotta drop everything and help me build this page. That's not fun for anyone, and that's where you get like really weird unicorn pages where it's just this giant hack of HTML and JavaScript like dropping to a body field or something, right? I know some of you have done that, I've seen it, come on. So drag and drop is the better way to do it, in my opinion. Also, pattern dev tools. Right now we're kind of all over the place. There's tons of people who use Pattern Lab, there's tons of people who use Storybook, tons of people who use KSS Node, there's tons of people who are like, what's a pattern dev tool, right? So what this allows us to do is consolidate on Pattern Lab and Pattern Lab Node specifically. Now, do you have to drop Storybook or drop KSS Node or any of your other tools? No. But if your stuff works with Pattern Lab, then it already works out of the box with Patternkit. And that means things are a lot easier for stuff like training and onboarding or getting your developers to build sites and scaffold things much quicker. So it's just all around very much time saving. And then finally, the last reason that I'm here and that we're talking about Patternkit is because there's a bit of a guilt complex at Red Hat, where we kind of went off and invented our own stuff in a corner, which is a really weird thing for an open source company to do. And we kind of looked at this and we're like, I'm feeling a little guilty about this. A little bit guilty. So since, in some circles at least, we're kind of recognized as a premier steward of open source, we're like, you know what, we need to kind of live up to that. We need to turn around, take a stand, and actually build things in a way that the community can take advantage of what we're doing and learn from it, right? We're not, a web development company, we don't sell websites or anything like that, but we do support platforms. And to us, when everybody's kind of working together and collaborating on building these websites and infrastructure on these platforms, it's a big win for everyone. There's also a lot of gains from working this way. And so that is also really weird looking. I apologize for that. I tested this on my screen at home and not on one of these projectors because I don't own one of these things. So let me see if I can get that to look a little better.
If you just control minus.
Yeah, it uses a slides.com library, which is a JavaScript rendering library, and yeah, it's kind of annoying. All right, well, I'll read through that for you. Basically, we've seen an average reduction of 3 days to our time for building pages. So if we get that last minute call, it's like, hey, we want to do this product launch, we got really lucky with this and everything just kind of coalesced earlier, so we want to go ahead with it so our partners can just start using it and talking about it. Normally, we have a developer come in and work on that page and build up all the different little flashy pieces of functionality that are being requested by our stakeholders. And that's not exactly fantastic. So that takes about 3 days or so from, hey, I need this page, to it's approved and up on production. Now, a lot of that sure is talking back and forth and getting approvals. It's not all developer time and that sort of thing. But there's still a whole bunch of people who have to now be tuned into a process that they'd rather not be tuned into. So what we've seen with this is we take that 3-day process and we just turn it into a 1-day thing where a content author comes in, they build the page, all sorts of new patterns and stuff. It's just available in the library. They can drag and drop, add things as they want, and then get it out into live in production the same day. We also across all of our different sites. Like we have opensource.com, we have redhat.com, we have our partners portal, we have a customer portal, all sorts of different little ways to interact with Red Hat. And each one of them builds their pages completely differently, which is kind of a nightmare. But for Drupal 8, we're consolidating essentially on a Patternkit as a way to get our patterns into the front end. And that's really helping things. This reduces our training by about 2 days on average. So it takes one of our senior developers about 2 days to learn how a new site's fully built up and get really comfortable and quick in working in it. And getting rid of that is super helpful. That means they can spend their time onboarding, worrying more about what's the business requirements and who are my stakeholders and other things that are more important than trying to figure out how the heck this pattern library ends up on the front end. Then of course it's open source and mainstream, right? So that's something that we love to see at Red Hat. We give away our OS, we give away our platform code, like we just give away everything because it's important to us. The community benefits from what we're doing, right? We're here for our enterprise customers. We're here for people who need that, support teams and that response time. But we want the community to be there and to actually exist and participate in how we're solving these different problems. And then finally, there's less meetings and fixes. So we've kind of found that standardizing on Patternkit and one way of getting our patterns to the front end means we have a lot less meetings where it's like, all right, whose fault is this? Nobody actually cares. We don't care whose fault it is. We just want to fix it. We want to get it rolling. And so that really helps us a lot in reducing the time needed to work through those fixes and workshop them and come up with a root cause or something. So there's 3 portions to what I'm talking about today. There's the actual pattern library itself. And the one that we typically use at Red Hat is Patternfly Elements. We also have our own custom libraries for certain things like managing containers on OpenShift, and stuff like that. Like obviously that's a use case only for us. No one else is really messing around with OpenShift. But Patternfly is like a whole bunch of application patterns that powers most of that. So anything that we can open source and that we think other people might find useful, we'll put it out there. And that's available at patternfly.com. Then we have, of course, Pattern Lab that we've standardized on as our tool of choice for getting all of these patterns in. So this is kind of a next-gen thing, especially since not only was it, I think, like a month or 2 ago, not even, where we got the PHP renderer working inside Pattern Lab Node, which is a huge win, because that means there's a single pipeline, a single suite of code that all of those patterns run through to make it out to the front end. And then finally, of course, Patternkit, the Drupal module. So that's the module that we're talking about today. So before I actually go into the demo of it, we got about 12 minutes left here. I want to kind of go into some of the alternatives because while we think this is the best way to build pages, we know there's a million other options out there, and this might not fit your project timeline or budget. Maybe you're working on a site right now and you're like, hey, this is alpha code. It got released 2 hours ago. Literally, I just released this code 2 hours ago. So if that's not quite where you guys are, that's fine. We'll talk about some of those. One of those is the UI patterns module. So it's a little module made by this guy, Alex DeMarco, super smart guy. It's a really cool module, and we've used it for a couple of builds. One of the downsides with that, though, is that it doesn't support mapping from your backend schema to your front end, which means if you're building a content type in Drupal and you're adding fields, or you're building paragraphs in Drupal and you're adding fields, your fields absolutely must match your front end. So there's not like an opportunity for you to bring in UI patterns to an existing site and really utilize the full power of it. You want to actually build your site or add additional features to your site that take advantage of UI patterns. Versus Patternkit, while there's less stuff that kind of ships out of the box with it, it's way more of I can take my existing site and build a new page with all these new patterns and use all that same data without having to add schema, without having to add fields, without having to do different display configurations. It just works. There also are some Red Hat projects. We have like proprietary type open source stuff. Some of these things are available on GitHub that you can grab, but we don't really advocate them anymore because the way that we're building this stuff, where it's open source first, it's on GitHub first. You guys can go look at the code history for this and see all the crazy commits that I've done over the past couple of weeks. It's all there. It's there for the community, and we're not like just building something in a corner and then being like, hey, everybody use this thing. Nope, we built this completely open from the beginning. If you guys are interested in web components, Patternfly Elements is our open source project for implementing those in this ecosystem. We could absolutely use some help with it. There's some really cool and really hard problems that we're solving. As well as there are some other alternatives that, of course, I'm sure you guys are aware of. One of those is the typical standard way of building things where You build your patterns in Twig or HTML or handlebars or something like that, and then use your Twig layer. You actually go into the Drupal templates and use that include mechanism and include those other templates from your pattern libraries, right? So that's the most common process. It's how I think most people in this room do it. But it requires developer work. This isn't something that like your content admin can come in and do, because they're going to look at the array that's coming in to Twig and be like, what the heck is this? It's like node.field.0.value.value or something like that. And it's like 8 strings long, and they can't navigate the array, and then the debug display completely crashes, and they get a white screen of death, and they're like, you know what, I hate you. So I do not advocate using that method, even though that's what most of us have been doing traditionally. And then finally, as far as the tools themselves for building up the pattern library, so like I mentioned, we got Storybook, KSS Node, Patternkit Server, which is the old open source version of this stuff. Most of them don't support web components out of the box, which is kind of sad for us because that's where we think everything is heading, is that we're going to really be building these web components and using those as our standard for patterns. And it's, unfortunately, a lot of these tools just aren't that feature rich. I mean, they get the job done. Like KSS Node, it's great. You can spin it up in 3 minutes and get going and have this entire suite of pattern libraries going for your design system. But you're missing stuff like a schema editor. You're missing things like being able to dynamically change the view size or change the theme that you're using or the CSS sources and stuff. All these features that are either in Pattern Lab or in add-ons for Pattern Lab that kind of come with that ecosystem. So that's another reason that we've kind of really standardized on that. We do have this Drupal guild developer thing. I'm going to kind of skip over this slide a little bit, but basically we're always open. We're always working with the community. If you guys are interested in what we're doing, if you want to help out or you just want some assistance and learn about that, feel free to reach out to me. Derek Reese on Twitter. Anybody at Red Hat is always a good option, especially the open source community, to kind of reach out to us, especially through Twitter, and say, hey, I'm interested in what you guys are doing. How can we talk to you? We have teams that actually do this sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do a crazy thing. I'm going to live demo this. Wish me luck. So first I'm going to show the stuff that I know is guaranteed working, and then in the remaining 10 minutes I'm going to try to build a quick pattern and show you guys how that's working. You all see that? Is that good? All right, so this is Umami. This is the demo profile for Drupal 8 that ships out of the box now. Super props to that team. This is amazing. Makes my development life a lot easier. I don't have to write a demo site to play through stuff. It just comes out of the box. So what we have here is our block layout page. So if you just go to structure and blocks, this is where you end up. And you can see it's just kind of a traditional suite of blocks that you can use. And what we have here is an example Patternkit pattern. So this is actually loaded through no custom code, just uses Patternkit out of the box, and it uses the default Twig plugin. So this is just a Twig pattern library, and I'll show you guys how to configure that stuff in a second. And of course, 1 second. Make sure I can reconnect to the internet here. Okay. There we go. So basically, the simple premise for Patternkit is it takes each one of these patterns that you have in your library. It's just a Twig file, right? It's all a pattern really is in most cases. In other cases, right, it might be a web component or React.js file. But it'll take it and create a block. And then it will dynamically create an interface for editing the actual contents of that pattern. So you can use the existing ones, and I'll show you guys the pattern itself in a second, but it has a text variable that it prints out, pretty simple. You can add additional bits of properties, so if you have optional properties that you want to hide and only maybe show to developers, there's plenty of options for that too. But you can take this text here, and I'm just going to add some stuff. And save it. And it doesn't just have to be text, right? They can be images or URLs, depending on how you've built your Twig patterns themselves. They can also be Drupal tokens, which is super helpful. So you can do things like, I want the node field body, and then the first thing from that, right? And that gets up to the front end. So I'm gonna go ahead and it should be saved. Okay. And let's go to an example page. Okay, so here it is already working. And I'm gonna go ahead and show the update, assuming nothing breaks because live demo. Okay, so it's still not loading. Let me refresh real quick. Right?
Then do it again.
Always do it twice. Yep. Always do it twice.
Okay. Cache is cleared. And of course, since I'm not like plugged in here, the laptop's like, no, you can't do anything. But yeah, there you go. There's the update. And that seems like pretty okay right on the surface, right? Everybody's edited content in Drupal and had it appear on the front page, so no real achievement there. So now I'm going to show you why it's important and what we're doing here. Okay, got our PHP storm up here. Let's click on the debug.
Can you make
Go.
it bigger?
Yeah, let me make sure presentation mode is going to display for you guys. Okay. There we go. Should be a lot easier to see. So what I have here in the module that's providing this, it can be a module or a theme. The only reason I'm using a module for this demo is because I can keep it really simple. I don't have to like bore you guys with, here's our giant theme and here's our pattern lab install and a million other files. So I'm just going to keep this to one demo since we're pretty limited on time here. So what I have in this example module is just something really simple. It's just a blank module file. Nothing in that, right? And then I have the usual info file for Drupal. Everyone's pretty familiar with that. But here's what we're doing a little bit differently. Is that too small? Can everyone see that? We're good? Yeah? Thumbs up? Thumbs up in the back? Cool, thank you. So normally you have your CSS and your JS and your libraries.yaml and Drupal 8, right? We've added something new here, patterns. And each one of these entries is a library that you could have as a source in your module or theme. So no matter where it is, all you gotta do is just add this patterns item here. And if Patternkit isn't installed, nothing changes on your Drupal site. If it is installed, however, it'll go ahead and go through these directories, find all of your Twig files. This is just the default config. You can change that to say React or handlebars or anything that you've managed to implement and plug in. And it'll find all those Twig files and then bring them into Drupal automatically. So you don't have to go and edit existing templates for Drupal. You don't have to go in and change up any sort of rendering system or install a bunch of other modules to get those things in. Just one module does all of that. And I'll show you what this library looks like. So inside this library folder is just the way I like to organize it. You don't have to put it in a lib folder. I just kind of prefer that personally. And then I have the library itself. This might look pretty familiar to most of you that work with front-end stuff, but you can see we have our normal setup with a gulp build process. So we're using Node to build up, all the different CSS and JS files and that sort of thing. And as you can see, they're attached here. So I got the JS file, the CSS file with the typical Drupal discovery mechanisms and rendering mechanisms. But if we go into our source folder here, that's what I have up. We go into atoms and then into our different individual files. Let me go ahead and pull up example. And again, you can organize this, however you prefer. Patternkit's going to discover it. So if you don't want to have a very complicated build system, you just want a raw CSS file or a raw Twig file, you can do that as well. I just kind of wanted to show like in a modern web infrastructure way what this stuff will look like. So go ahead and pull these up. Here's a Twig file, right? Super simple. And as you saw, that data that was displayed on the front end, right, it says test sample Twig template, and then all the text from the back end of Drupal, which again, like I said, that can be tokens that you drop in, that can be node context, that can be user context, any data that you have in Drupal. It's that easy to expose it over to these templates and into your patterns systems. And then we have the actual Twig itself that writes out some of that stuff. Don't do that, don't use raw. This is just, so you can play around, you can write HTML in there, I can kind of demo some stuff. This is my demo library. And then the other half of this, so the reason it knew it was a text field and didn't require you to say it's a text field, this is kind of the trick with all of this. If you want things to be automatically discoverable and already have metadata, so it knows that the different variables you're passing to your Twig are text or images or arrays of different items, whatever you need, you can specify it in JSON schema. And so this is completely open source. This is a thing that has like multiple RFCs out there. It's pretty much a web standard at this point. But you use the JSON schema to actually specify. So I'm saying here, this variable called text, right? It's a string. And we have a couple of extra like metadata options in there to kind of help guide the display. So we say, hey, if you're going to display this particular field in an editor, we don't want it to be any longer than 4 columns in whatever layout engine you're using, things like that. But otherwise, it's relatively simple. And basically, you specify, whatever the type of data is that you want your pattern to take. And Patternkit will add this in and discover this metadata procedurally just by you specifying it in your libraries YAML, and then pull these Twig patterns into the GUI, as you can see there. That's kind of the magic of Patternkit. Let me see if I have enough time to build a new one for you guys. I do not. I'm out of time. Okay. But basically, to build a new one, just kind of cover that real quick, you can copy and just paste this example directory and just, rename it, write your own Twig patterns up. If you already have an example library of your own, or like, for example, you're taking Google Material Design and putting Twig templates around it, all you have to do to make this stuff discoverable is add it to the libraries YAML, and then if you want the extra metadata to kind of help your content authors do things properly, just add the JSON schema file, and all of that will get ingested and automatically discovered.
So like in the real world, how would you like do like a call to action where, you maybe say, I want to select the product, and whether it's a trial or a contact sales, guess you would kind of have your pattern, Twig pattern, and then have the different properties there that they could configure?
Yeah. So basically, if you're doing this in like procedural, like component way, right? So you have a pattern library. Your front-end developer will get the design from your designer, right? And this design will have the call to action. It'll have how it looks in full width as well as on mobile, that sort of thing. Your front-end developer will build this pattern, build the Twig file, build the CSS, build the JS for it, and then put that in a library, right? This can be your Drupal theme. This could be a separate Git repo, wherever you keep your patterns. And then normally in your typical process, right, then you have a developer come in and they write the Twig to connect all this stuff and parse through all the different Drupal arrays and everything. So we're going to skip that, and instead, the only thing you need to do is add that libraries.yaml entry that says this is where the Twig files are, go look for them. Now, if you would like to add the metadata that says, hey, maybe this field is a phone number, so it needs to be a phone number field in Drupal, that's where that schema file comes in. That helps it understand the data that's going into your Twig patterns. The nice thing about that being an open standard too, is we've also been able to apply this to our decoupled sites. So that means we're building like a new React site that just is demoing something real quick, so it needs to be reactive, it needs to be highly interactive. There's not a lot of data on the back end, right? But we still want things to be translatable. We still want content authors to be able to author some of the marketing pages in Drupal. We can share this pattern library between both of them, and React is able to procedurally discover this stuff as well without us having to sit down and write extra JS for it. And the same thing works for our web components too. So we're actually building these schemas for all of our web components that we're putting into Patternfly, the pattern repository that I was talking about. So it allows all that stuff to be completely discoverable and interoperable and all work with each other. So we build patterns once, we put the schema on it, and we can use it in React, we can use it in Drupal, wherever. Really helps save some timelines. This is speaking of timelines, this is our roadmap for the module. I'm going to be supporting it full time. We also have a couple other people contributing it to it, as well as the ecosystem. We have awesome people at Red Hat who are actually building all these web components and Patternfly things and making sure that they work with all this stuff. So I won't go into detail too much on that because we're pretty much out of time here. But do we have any other questions? Yeah.
So some of them are easy. So these Patternkit libraries can be defined at the theme layer, right?
Yes. Yeah. All you need is a libraries.yaml.
Cool. And you can specify other fields, like you mentioned you can specify other fields besides text fields, like select fields, and you can, those will map to the various different Drupal fields.
Exactly. So the way that Patternkit actually does the field rendering is it doesn't use Drupal's field renderer because it doesn't, essentially there's not a very easy way to say Drupal, hey, in real time I want to let you edit this stuff. Drupal doesn't have a JavaScript-based field editing system, right? We all know that. We know how painful it is to sit there and add fields and hit save and then it reloads the page and it keeps going and going and going. So we decided to skip that and write our own system for it that just parses into JSON, but it understands everything that Drupal has. Yeah, that's full knowledge of that stuff.
And like the last question is, how do you hook it up to like data, like as opposed to putting in new data? You know, like you use like something like tokens.
Yeah. So this exists in the Drupal 7 version of the module and does not exist in Drupal 8 because I'm still writing the code for it. So if you guys want to help, that'd be great. Let me show you. So if we go over here to the Patternkit example, and I'm going to go ahead and configure that. If you wanted to come in here and do, I don't know, user, and then their ID, I think, or just ID, then you can do that, right? And it should ostensibly work. And this is how it works in Drupal 7. In Drupal 8, we're also building a node-based editor. So for those of you that have ever used like Unreal Engine script or Blender or Shake or anything that allows you to take little pieces of code and kind of connect them together with a drag and drop interface where you're like, hey, I want field and I want it to go to, you know, a title or something like that. We have that built and working in a JavaScript prototype and we're currently integrating it into the module. And we're open for contributions for other different ways that you guys would like to do pattern mapping. We had somebody that was playing around with taking the Drupal token module that like lists all the tokens, and you can click on one, drag and drop it into a field, and then it parses it and renders it and shows you what it looks like. So we thought that was really cool, and we're like, yeah, let's get that into the module. So, and then like I said, all this stuff is under development. There's a full roadmap for it. We're planning on supporting it pretty much definitely because we're building all of our sites on it. And so this stuff is actually going to be in production on a live Red Hat site at the end of this month. So yeah, we're super excited about this stuff and very much all in. Do you have any more questions? Cool. So it's drupal.org/patternkit. I'm Derek Reese. Thank you all so much. Hey.